Welcome to VCR, Vintage Cinema Rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
They mostly come at night. Mostly.
Ooh, chilling excerpt
Chilling.
from this week's episode, which we're doing a deep dive on, of the movie Aliens from 1986.
Woo! Yes,
Yeah.
We're still here. We're still doing this.
We're still doing it. This is our last episode of the Sigourney Weaver series that we've been doing over the last month or so. And it's been a lot of fun. I've been really enjoying rewatching these movies. They're some of my favorites from all time. They're just so fascinating, endlessly fascinating how different these two movies in this series are. And we're going to talk about all that today.
I think we've had some good, we're just about halfway through 2024, and I think we've had some good choices this year.
Yeah.
Tremors, Groundhog Day. I was thinking about Watership Down the other night. I'm like, yeah, we're picking good movies.
Yeah, we've hit some really good ones, like some of my favorites of all time we've gotten to do, and some of your favorites of all time this year. I'd like to watch maybe in the back half of the year a couple movies that I haven't seen before, so that maybe I have a couple of old movies to talk about in our top 5 at the end of the year. But, as in terms of like movies that I've rewatched this year, I can't complain.
No, I certainly can't either. Have you made any choices for your top 5 yet?
I think I have probably 2 movies that are newer that'll probably be on there, and potentially one movie from the early 2000s that I watched for the first time in the last month or 2.
I have not narrowed down my list completely, but I have one specific choice, and it's really going to piss you off. That's all I'm going to say.
That is very interesting.
I would say it's going to damage my credibility as a film viewer, but I think just this podcast has already damaged my credibility enough.
That is so fascinating. I cannot wait to hear what that movie is.
And you know what? You and the people at home, none of you will ever be able to figure out what it is.
Yeah, I really don't know either. Like I'm kind of drawing a blank, but anyway, that's here nor there. Let's talk about our deep dive, spoiler-full discussion of the movie Aliens. If you haven't seen this movie, go back and check out our primer episode because we're about to get real into it.
You're going to get real alien-y, yeah.
Yeah, and that's your cutoff point. So let's talk in front of the camera.
I thought you were talking to me for a second. Like, that's your cutoff point.
You're done.
What?
You're done.
And
out
then
of here.
The rest of the episode is just Blake talking
Just
to
Blake.
himself. Yeah. That would be pretty funny if I got too rowdy one episode and you just cut me off and then you just finished it without me.
Yeah. Anyway, let's get into Alien. So the opener of this movie, and this is something that we're going to hammer home over the next 30 minutes, is so effective in reintroducing this world to an audience that has moved on almost 10 years to when the original came out. And I think that this, in this case, is probably the best opening to a sequel that I've ever seen. And I want to just note like a couple things, like, for example, when they first find Ripley's ship out floating in space after years of just floating in there and she's in her cryo tube, I love the symbolism of them like dusting Ripley's tube off. Like, we're dusting off this franchise for another one here.
Yeah, we're like, oh, we got a little more. It's still fresh. We got a little more in the tank.
Yeah, exactly. Love that. Love that. And then we go and we cut to Ripley waking up. She's in the hospital bed, and we get the nightmare scene. And I think that this is, again, one of the greatest nightmare sequences of a film ever.
As someone who's seen this movie before, I was surprised again this time.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, Ripley starts freaking out, and I'm like, all right, calm down, lady. And then the chest burster starts, like, pushing at her her tummy, her chest. And I was like, oh, no.
Yeah. It's so fascinating because, A, you don't expect a nightmare scene to come so quick in a movie, and B, the nightmare scene is used as exposition to catch the viewer up on what's happened since the last movie has taken place. And obviously, like, that moment there must have taken place in real life. It's what, Ripley must have experienced when she first woke up, and then it's kind of interlaced with the actual horror of all of it. So you just don't expect the scene to go where it goes because it feels like so natural to where this movie would naturally head.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's a good way. And then again, I mentioned before. Then we have the boardroom scene, which does a really good job of, again, catching us up to speed. Like it gives Ripley a chance to explain herself. There's the great conflict and tension of like, the cigar chomping suits just being like, all right, well, we didn't find any trace of any alien life form. And
Yeah.
I do think it's kind of funny. I was actually rewatching that scene today where it's like the suits are such comically 80s bad guys, but at the same time it's like if I was like working on a merchant freighter and they found me drifting in the middle of the ocean having crashed the freighter and they like pulled me out of the ocean and I was like, well, there's an alien on board and I had to kill it. Like
Right.
people would probably have questions for me.
It has like honestly one of the probably most underrated quotes of the entire movie where she's arguing about the aliens being on that planet and how, that planet should essentially be quarantined and nobody go there. And the guy's like, well, you can ask like the people who have gone them themselves. Like we've started to colonize that planet. And it's just like that line just like hits like such a like I don't know, like it just hits so hard because you're just like, oh my God, like
What
how
the
did this
fuck?
happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so wild that like that you don't expect anybody to have tried to colonize this planet after we have seen the events of the first movie.
Right. But then I forget how much time has passed between this movie and or the first movie?
57 years.
Yeah, but then it's also like I guess that's enough time that human settlers would have been like, all right, that one.
Yeah, exactly. So, and she's been floating out there for forever. And so, and then we get, Burke shows up, and you talked about this in the primer episode. He comes off as really likable. He comes off as a potential love interest for Ripley in the beginning. Like, he feels very empathetic towards her. Like, he comes across as a very genuine person.
Mm-hmm. Even he's the guy who delivers the call to adventure where he's like, we lost contact with the settlers. Why don't you come with me? He's like, come on, I know that like you're not sleeping and I know about the nightmares you've been having. Like, maybe this will be a chance for you to like face your fears. And he's so compelling that you're almost kind of like, yeah, maybe it's not a terrible idea.
Ripley says right off the bat as well, like, we're going there to destroy them. And he doesn't really hesitate. He's like, yeah, like we're going to go get rid of these things because obviously it sounds like your experience with them was pretty horrific. And like one of them wiped out your entire crew. Like if anybody gained control of all of these eggs, like it would be world ending.
It would be despairing. Yeah.
And then, we get to the crew, the Marine crew, and this is such a fascinating part of this movie because this is my only critique of the film is starting with when the Marines are introduced, because this is where the infamous James Cameron dialogue starts in full. It's supposed to be this goofy ragtag team of Marines who don't take anything too seriously, like they don't even take orders all that seriously.
Well, you gotta love the Sergeant Johnson type who immediately pops a cigar in his mouth the second he's out of cryo
Start
sleep.
literally chomping on a cigar.
Yeah, right. I'm like, was that in the pod with you? Like,
yeah. And it's just like, I think, you're a writer, Jess is a writer, I watch a lot of movies and listen to a lot of dialogue, and it's somewhat off-putting at how weak the dialogue is in these scenes, and these characters are all, like, so highly unlikable that it's funny. This is the first time that Jess had actually seen this movie when we watched it, and she was actively getting mad at this movie at this point in time and like getting frustrated with it. And she's like, this is a bad movie. And I was like, just give it another 20 minutes.
I know that you're supposed to like these guys. You know what I
No,
mean? Yeah.
but
you could really, like, if you wanted to go the toxic masculinity angle, you could really be like, wow, these guys are all about to die. You know what I mean?
and I think they leaned into that quite a bit, right? And I think that is also a little bit the sign of the 80s, right? And like reflecting on masculinity at that point in time. Like this is after the first Predator movie came out, which also kind of reflected on that idea as well a bit. And so, I think that is so interesting because as a first-time watch of this movie, like this might be a point in time where I could see some people may deciding to turn this movie off. because you think that this movie is shaping up to be centered around this Marine Corps group. And oh boy, in the first 30 minutes, things change quite drastically.
I think it's funny you talk about the dialogue. There's that great line from I'm just gonna keep calling him Sergeant Johnson, from the Halo franchise, because it's very clearly who they were basing Sergeant Johnson off of. But he has that line where he's like,
Right.
"We've got some juicy colonist daughters who we've got to rescue from their virginities." I was like, "Bro, what?" If I was hanging out with a group of guys and somebody said that, I'd be like, "What did you just? All right, like."
Yeah. And that also doesn't really like slow up at any point in the movie. Like the dialogue in this movie, I think the word is probably pedestrian. Like it's not written with any like sort of ulterior, like deeper meaning behind any of the dialogue. Like the first movie is like a high concept, like, very thematic, very philosophical movie. And this movie is not that at all.
I don't know that the dialogue actually didn't jump out at me that as much as it jumped out at you. It's more just kind of like, these are a bunch of assholes being assholes. You know what I mean? The kind of like boys' locker room kind of thing. But I guess, yeah, now that you pointed out, there is, despite appearances, I am actually a boy, and I've been in men's locker rooms. Never heard anyone talk like this.
Yeah. Exactly. And just like quotes are later in the movie as well, when the characters are just talking back and forth. Like, I just kind of cringed at some stuff where I was like, oh, this could have like
this could have used a little more TLC. This could have used another pass. Yeah, I get that.
So that's just my thinking there, and that's what the only thing about this movie that kind of rubs me the wrong way is that it just feels so basic, and that's my biggest contrast with the first movie in terms of quality.
Well, it's funny. So then we jump ahead to when the scene we were just talking about, where the colonial Marines first encounter the xenomorphs, and things go tits up very quickly. You know what I mean? Like, you actually kind of like, oh, were you guys supposed to be badasses? Because you're all getting your asses kicked. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a big Zero Punctuation fan, and do you remember the game Aliens Colonial Marines?
No, I don't.
So back in 11 years ago, in 2013, there was a AAA game called Aliens Colonial Marines that came out. That was it was a first-person shooter set in the Alien franchise from the perspective of one of the Marines. And I'm a huge Zero Punctuation fan, and I remember Yahtzee being incredulous that they would even bother making that movie. He had a great line where he's like, making an Aliens game about the Colonial Marines would be like making a Blues Brothers game about the cops. Like, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's a good point. They're wildly inept because they don't take the threat seriously.
Yeah.
But in all fairness as well, this threat is something that they've never seen before. Like, the aliens this is mentioned several times in the franchise. The aliens are the apex predator of this universe. Like, they are bred to kill.
Basically, yeah. To kill and to kill and to kill. And boy, do they do that.
And when you think about the way that this movie frames the aliens as compared to the first one has one egg and it kills everybody except for Ripley and the cat. Whereas in this movie, there's untold numbers of aliens, and they took out the entirety of the colony. I think we should mention at this point, too, that, I think that this is something that was cut from the first movie, having the characters be potted and converted into, like, breeding pods, essentially, for future alien future alien animals to come out.
Yeah, and there's that iconic moment where the one human settler is still alive, and the first words out of her mouth are just "kill me."
Yeah. And so, that's a use of from the old movie that is so effective and so creepy, and it's something that's been used since then, because it's like really truly horrifying to think of like yourself as basically like they're basically animals caught in a spider web, essentially.
Yeah, essentially. You're cattle at this point. You know what I mean? It's very, very upsetting. This is actually, and this is something I did want to talk about this episode, and this is something I wanted to ask you. Do you think this movie makes the xenomorph a little less terrifying though in hindsight?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, that's in it. Maybe it's a just sort of a regrettable but fair outcome of this movie. But like, I did make the joke recently where it's like, how do we kill the xenomorph? It's like, well, it turns out they're vulnerable to bullets.
Well, yeah, and that, in a sense, does somewhat make sense, right? I think what makes them so fascinating as villains is they are relatively intelligent. And so, yes, they're not immune to bullets, but they understand that themselves, and so they find creative ways to like sneak up on their prey. Like they're often, this is something that gets used in the first movie, it's something that gets used very prominently in this movie. They're often lurking in the shadows, they're often using vents or other alternative pathways to get to their prey, essentially, right?
Yeah, and that's again something that's so interesting about the transition from horror to action is it's like how do we stop the xenomorphs? Well, have you tried shooting it? Have you tried shooting it with a gun?
What I also think is really fascinating about this type of villain is they're bred using human bodies as eggs, essentially, right? And what I've always wondered about the Alien franchise, and I'm sure this is explained in some sort of supplementary material, but I'm sure that the reason why the Alien face huggers use a host to breed inside of them is I'm sure that there's some sort of DNA kind of crossover going on at like during the breeding period, in which case these aliens use the genetic makeup of their host against what they're trying to kill.
Yeah, essentially, right? And I think yeah, that gets followed up upon in later movies for good or for ill, but
Yeah, and I think that the other component to that as well is that what's even if you kill an alien, the kill an alien to kill a person isn't always one to one, right? Because if they capture you before you're dead, they will use you to make more aliens.
yeah, I also wanted to point out that the whole key detail of like aliens bleeding acid, it's
Hmm.
they make a big song and dance about of it. They make a big song and dance out of it in the first movie, but it doesn't really amount to all that much. Like I think it's just a plot detail they came up with to explain why they couldn't just cut it off John Hurt's head, right? It's like, oh,
Right.
it's bleeding acid, sorry. But this movie they actually make really effective use of it, right?
Hmm.
Like there's I think a couple Marines are taken out by the acid blood.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I also want to say about the opening like 30 minutes, I love the set design of the colony and everything leading up to that point in time. Like it does a really good job. The soldiers moving through the colony is really like I'm on the edge of my seat with tension waiting for the aliens to pop up, but I
Right.
also am just like taking in all the scenery. Like I love the set design of this. What I also love about this and this point in time is that the movie spends all this time building like our subconscious idea of like what this setting is, like what humanity looks like at this point in time in the future. And so you get kind of used to like moving through these corridors and what they look like and everything. And then we get to down into the like depths of the terraforming machine, and we're essentially moving from like this human habitat that kind of makes sense in our minds to essentially hell.
Yeah, hell's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
And it's so effective at just like unnerving you, and like you're suddenly walking through what should be something that your mind understands and what the movie's done a good job of building towards, or building in your head this universe. And then it just makes it like so disturbing as these characters move into like essentially like it almost looks like they're moving into the body of some great beast.
Yeah. And actually that's probably one of my favorite parts of this movie is again just when they find the human colony and it just looks completely fucked. You're just
Yeah.
like, what happened here? Actually,
Right.
this movie made the transition to action, but like there were a few pulse pounding moments of this movie, like so much so that I actually this time around I was musing. I was like, is this action or is this horror? Like what am I watching, right?
Right. Yeah.
There was a moment at the end though where I was like, oh yeah, it's action. Never mind.
Yeah, it threads the needle. It's definitely an action movie over a horror movie, but there's some really great horror elements to it. The last thing that I want to talk about in the first 30 minutes or so is, and this kind of goes again to the horror element of this, that the colony, when they first get there and they're going through the different parts of the colony, and they get to that science medical wing, and the face huggers are in those jars, and you can tell that these settlers have stumbled upon this and they've begun to study the aliens. That's one of like the biggest jump moments of the entire movie. Like, I knew that on this watch that the alien facehugger was going to jump at that moment inside of its test tube at Burke, but the scene almost like spends too long in getting your defenses down. Like, it spends an overly long period of time like on that frame of Burke looking at the alien and them all discussing it, to the point where I actually jumped when it moved still, and Jess jumped, and then our dog jumped.
Your dog's a little jumpy, Blake.
Yeah, and it got all three of us watching this movie again. So I thought that was really fun, and I thought that that's, like, that's really one of the only jump scares of the movie, but it's a really effective one.
It's pretty cool, yeah. By the way, that's totally something the Half-Life game stole. When you got the facehugger type thing in a little glass case. Priceless.
All of this is leading towards one of the biggest moments of the movie, and this is the one scene to sell a movie that I was talking about, which is the Marines head into the terramorphing machine to go and find all of the colonists that appear to be in one space deep down in the radioactive part of the nuclear reactor part of the colonizing machine. And I love the setup for this scene, because as they're going down, so we've got, the setup is all the Marines are heading down, and then Ripley with the Marine sergeant who is very inexperienced, and we've got the android Bishop, and at this point they found the girl Newt, which we haven't even talked about yet, and they're all in that tank watching them head down into the depths. And it's at this moment in time that one of the characters, I believe it's Burke, reminds the sergeant that they can't actually shoot down in the machine, because if they do, there's a potential that it could hit something inside of the reactor and set off a nuclear explosion that would be the size of Nebraska.
I think that was actually Ripley who pointed that out.
Okay.
Ripley, once again, being the voice of reason, just being like, I don't actually think you should use live fire in there.
Right. That just adds like such a genius element to this entire scene, because it explains why these Marines are going to be slightly incapacitated against the aliens that they have never experienced before, right? Then we get like one of the best scenes in the entire movie, which is they stumble upon the living colonist, and there's the big fight. Almost all of the Marines die, and a lot of it we cut between seeing the action actually happen, and then we see the action through the cameras that Ripley and their group are seeing it through, and it's really horrifying, honestly.
It's not great. I've certainly seen better, like. It's I like to call this the scene where everything goes tits up.
Well, and it's even like scary, like thinking about the real world connections to that. Like, I'm sure on like special, military engagements, like they would potentially have like these kind of cameras set up on, their military members, and having to watch people go through combat like that is just wild, just a different world. But anyway, it's such a great scene. It kills off like almost all of the Marines apart from Hicks, Vasquez, and Hudson.
Yeah.
I believe are the only 3 Marines out of almost a dozen people that survive this massacre.
I do think one of my funniest part is that there's this lieutenant who's kind of leading the team, but he's a little inexperienced. Gorman, I think his name is.
Yes.
I do like how during the escape, though, like a canister falls on his head and he gets knocked out.
Yeah, he has a concussion, and they're basically like, well, Gorman's useless now.
Yeah, I'm like, I think
useless.
I think Gorman was useless before the concussion, but anyways, so...
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of just like, well, there goes all those Marines. Like,
Yeah, that's kind of, and that's what you expect the movie to be. You expect the movie to be like this Marine movie, and then they all get eliminated, and you're like, wow, we're 30 minutes into this movie. Where's the next hour and a half, hour 45 of this going now?
Right. But I like that. That would have been too many characters for us to engage with, but now that they've all been wiped out, it lets us focus in on the main players like Ripley, Hicks. Should we talk about Hicks? Hicks kind of turns out to be like, this time around in particular, I was kind of like, I think Hicks and Bishop really became my favorite characters.
Sure, yeah. What do you want to talk about?
I actually don't know that I have that much to say about them. Just that I really liked both of them. Like Hicks kind of turns out to be like a reasonable authority figure, and again, there's that, we talked about this last episode, the great subversion with there was Ash, an alien, who turned out to be the saboteur, and
right, and working for the Corp.
Right. And then we meet Bishop, who turns out to actually be a pretty cool guy.
Well, and it's so fascinating. We can talk about this. This is, again, in the first, 30 minutes of the movie, when we first find out that Bishop is an android. And it's such a fun scene where they do, the knife trick. And this gets into a little bit of effects in filming as well. Like, Bill Paxton didn't realize that Henriksen was going to do the knife trick over top of Bill Paxton's hand. So that reaction is a little bit real from Bill Paxton as well. Obviously, they sped that up, but he still was moving pretty quick through those fingers, I think. Obviously at that point in time, we realized that he's a robot. Ripley realizes it. We get the small confrontation.
There's that great scene though where they're just in the cafeteria and Bishop just kind of reveals that he's a robot. And Ridley is basically just like, you can't sit with us. You're a robot.
Yeah. And it's so fascinating in that scene because, he basically explains away you had a previous model. Yeah, those models were a bit messy, I'm different kind of thing. And you're kind of left wondering, is this android actually being honest here? Does he have some deeper ulterior motives as well? He doesn't appear to be sinister, but at the same time, we really don't know what this movie's going to throw at us.
Well, and I think that's where the casting choice of Henriksen is so brilliant because, he does kind of have this sort of, jolly uncle vibe where he's just here to help. But he's also, and, I'm not throwing shade at Lance Henriksen, he's kind of a weird-looking guy.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Not a bad-looking guy, just a little different-looking. To the point where you do kind of look at him like, I don't know, maybe you are the bad guy. Ugh.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting, and you really don't know what to think about him one way or the other. And for large chunks of the movie, he kind of disappears as well, which also kind of plays into that fact of what is Bishop up to right now?
What is Bishop up to? Yeah. Turns out he's just a straight G, and he's just fixing things behind the scenes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and he spends time studying the aliens while all of this stuff is going on with, them doing the sweep of the colony and everything. It's really fascinating, and it's again one of those contrasts to the first movie of okay, well, here's what you expect us to do, so let's flip this on its head.
I'm gonna do something different then. Yeah. It's very much, there's even that great moment, and this is jumping ahead, when we get that crazy third act where Ripley emerges onto the platform having rescued Newt, and the ship isn't there, and she's just like, Bishop, damn you! And then the alien queen shows up, and then the ship comes in, and he scoops her up, and Bishop is just add the next. He's like, I'm sorry, the platform was giving way. I had to circle. I didn't mean to scare you.
Yeah. Well, and I think so. The actor playing Bishop, I was reading about his portrayal, and he was saying that he was kind of trying to portray the character as a child almost.
Okay.
And so it's kind of more lighthearted, trying to be as innocent as a child essentially. And so I think that, he did a really good job of portraying that on screen. It's so fascinating taking the audience expectations and messing with you the whole movie. You really don't know when he's going to turn, basically, right?
Yeah, it's funny. And this is where I'm talking about how the alien movies talk to each other. If you'd seen the first one and you realize that Bishop is an android, you're like, oh, you're on Ripley's side. You're like, well, fuck this guy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And speaking of Bishop playing, or Henriksen playing the character as a child, the scene in the cafeteria where Ripley kind of chews him out for being an android, he looks so stunned. It's the idea of prejudice has never even occurred to him. He's like, whoa, okay, Jesus, I'm out of here.
It definitely paints an interesting portrait as well of like this world that we're being dropped into, right? Where like androids they're almost gimmicks, like with the knife scene and everything, but they're kind of just genuinely accepted in human culture at this point, and
Hey,
maybe they're not quite equals, but they're not also just like tortured beings either.
hey, I think I've seen ads for like AI girlfriends now, so like we're not that far off from that living in that future, you know?
Right. Yeah. So
Don't ask me how I've seen those ads. I'm single now. Facebook just shows them to me without my consent. It's very insulting.
fun.
But anyways,
Maybe just need to spend less time on Facebook.
yeah, I guess so. That's just a good rule of thumb for everyone, actually.
Yeah. So then Ripley saves what's left of the military group, and they head back to the science medical bay and barricade all the walls up. Oh no, I forgot about even like so they call the drop ship to come pick them up. And the friggin' drop ship has an alien on it and
Right. It
murders
gets blown
them.
up. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is like, this kind of also puts the entire plot on a deadline, because as it's flying towards the terraforming machine that they've just narrowly escaped from, when the alien attacks them and kills them, the ship actually hits the terraforming machine, and then they're down to only hours until the terraforming machine overheats and the nuclear explosion happens.
By the way, that's incredible writing too, right? Like,
Right.
we've just killed all the colonial marines. A lesser writer would have been like, that's enough. Like, we've killed
Yeah.
all the colonial marines. There's xenomorphs running around. That's enough. But James Cameron, the genius, just went, no, actually, there needs to be more tension here.
Well, and it's fascinating too, because it also just like even more so cuts off this ragtag group at this point from any known civilization or any escape or anything like that, right? Like they essentially are now trapped on this planet. The ship that they arrived on, they can't really remotely access unless they are able to like essentially they almost have to go back to the terraforming machine to go to like this one antenna where the aliens are known to be lurking around.
Lurking is a good term for it, yeah.
Yeah, and manually send another ship down to come pick them up. And all of this needs to happen, and they need to evade the aliens over like I don't know 12 hours or something like that. They're mere hours away from imminent death.
Yep. It's pretty flawless, like as a thriller, right?
Right.
And then Hicks kind of steps up and sort of takes control. Hudson
Right.
kind of has a full-blown meltdown where he's,
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah. And then we've got Burke, who turns out to be a huge piece of shit.
Yeah, at the end of the day, Burke's ulterior motive was that he was the one who sent the colonists there because he found, before Ripley was even found, he found some of Ripley's transmissions to the corporation that were floating out in space for a number of years. And so he sent the colony, created the colony, sent them out to find the alien spaceship. He was the one who got the ball rolling on the studying the alien. And he didn't even tell the colonists about what they were finding. Like, he let that be a surprise to them.
Right.
And then he's also has this plan that he's not going to, at first he's not going to let them kill all the aliens because they're going to take them back and it's going to be some military scientific genius discovery that he's found. And then after that, they pretty much can't coexist with the alien at this point in time, he decides instead what he's going to do is actually maybe impregnate somebody with an alien so that he can put them in cryo and get the alien back that way. And
Right. And he chooses Ripley and Newt while they were taking a nap.
And again, this is part of the genius of James Cameron, is we get the scene where things are quiet for a moment. We've barricaded off this area of the colony from the aliens. It seems like it's going to hold up. It seems like a pretty strong barrier that they've set up, and they've set up watches and everything. And poor Newt who's so traumatized at this point. And we haven't really talked about Newt. This is the second time I've said that, but we need to at some point. And Newt and Ripley have decided to take a little nap in that one room. We see the gun go on top of the bed as they go and sleep underneath the bed and hide underneath there from, the bed bugs, essentially. Like, I think that that's really cool that instead of sleeping above the bed, they sleep underneath the bed. Like, it's such like a subversion of like the human experience of being afraid of what's underneath your bed. And that these aliens are actually more terrifying than what's underneath the bed as a kid. And then we get the scene where they wake up and there's been not one, but actually two facehuggers that have been set loose in the room in which they are in. And Ripley's gun is conveniently outside of the room that they can see, and the door is locked.
Right. And then we see Burke. He's watching the whole thing from a video monitor, and he just very discreetly turns it off.
The best part of all of that, though, is you don't know what's happened. It's very disorienting, almost like waking up yourself in this moment. It's very disorienting because James Cameron has clearly shown to you that this is a relatively safe place to sleep. They are relatively well armed. They are ready to go in case of emergency here. And then they wake up and all of this has changed. And James Cameron has specifically shown us and led us up to this point of like, okay, there's this quiet moment, this like brief moment of security. And then he rips that away from us, and we're left as confused as Ripley is and alarmed as Ripley is. And that's when Burke shows up and turns the camera off. And I love this entire scene, and from like a creative standpoint, and like how well orchestrated it all is.
Yeah, I agree. It's very... And again, that's the brilliance of James Cameron. It wouldn't be enough to throw one facehugger in there. We got to throw two in there just for...
And the second one's a surprise, too. Like, we don't even know that there's a second one until, like, it's basically on Ripley's face.
Yeah, right. It's really good.
It even subverts, like, that sort of trope, right? Of, like, something bad happening and then us left wondering what's happened or who's done it. James Cameron almost immediately shows us that it's Burke who's behind all of this, right? Like, we're not left guessing, even though like it's probably somebody obvious. We know exactly who's done it right away.
Yeah,
or
no
almost
kidding.
near right away. And then they survive that, and then the revelation of Burke being a true corporate monster. His ambitions have outgrown humanity essentially at this point in time.
What's
his humanity.
What's that Darth Vader quote? Like, careful you don't choke on your own ambitions. Something like that. Yeah.
Right.
Isn't it weird that we've never done a Star Wars movie?
It's a little weird. We should probably do one at some point in time. They're movies that have been analyzed so many times that like it feels almost slightly redundant. And I have talked about them like they've just been a part of our lives for so long too that it almost feels slightly redundant.
Well, like my YouTube homepage, I keep getting stuff where it's like, oh, The Acolyte, episode 6. I'm like, I don't fucking care anymore. But anyways, enough about Star Wars. Let's return to this other sci-fi property. Should we talk about Newt?
Yes, let's talk about Newt. We've danced around Newt for too long. The only survivor of the colony, and she survived living in a garbage chute for weeks, if not months, by herself alone, while these monsters have dominated this space colony for whoever knows how long, right?
Yeah, she's a really believable character. Like, I believe that this little brat has survived this long by herself just by being clever. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, I don't think a human could, like an adult could have lived this long, but she definitely could. You know what I mean?
Yeah, she's really resourceful. She's also, like, adequately terrified of these aliens. Like, she respects the true terror of these aliens and how absolutely, like, outmatched she is against these as just a kid, even like a human being, etc. Right? Like, she has essentially survived just by living the bare minimum and just like hanging on by a thread in this garbage chute.
It's kind of like the complete inverse of the Colonial Marines, right? Like, these are a bunch of like roided up dudes who think they can just go in and blast it away, and they get completely curb stomped. Then we've got this little girl who survived just by like skittering around and like, she's accepted her place in the food chain, and she's just running around stealing food, doing whatever.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it, right? Because that is something that these movies, I think one theme of these movies is like nature versus like human beings, right? And like how, we can tamper with nature, but like there's limits to what we can and can't dominate in nature. And I think that this also brings back like that primal fear of like, when we were tens of thousands of years ago, when we were living in caves and we weren't the top of the food chain necessarily.
Yeah, if I may drop some more Michael lore, I have a friend who's very cheap. I won't say who he is, but I have a friend who's just dirt cheap. It's not you, don't worry. And it's a sweltering fucking summer out there. He has refused to turn his air on this whole time. Well, it's on, but it's like just very fleetingly on. So this motherfucker got heat stroke the other day and ended up spending hours puking into the toilet. And
geez.
I was talking to him about it. And he's like, yeah, I didn't want to pay for air conditioning, so I just had it on very lightly. And like, it was really hot the other night, but like, I didn't want to turn on the air conditioning. And then next thing I know, I'm really dizzy and my stomach's upset. And then blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, yeah, that's heat stroke, bro. Like, yeah. And I was like, did you turn the air conditioning on now? He's like, yeah, it's on. I'm like, and like, I'm making fun of this guy, but like, I get it, right? Like, sometimes we forget that we're animals. Yeah. Sometimes we forget that we're animals and that nature is much, much vaster and much, much more powerful than we are. Sometimes we forget our own insignificance.
Yes, and it's movies like these that help remind us, right?
Just how insignificant we really are. But like, that's part of my daily affirmations is every day I look at myself in the mirror and I'm like, you're insignificant. Have a good day.
Yeah.
But
fuck you and I'll see you tomorrow.
Fuck you and I'll see you tomorrow. Yeah. So I did actually want to talk about this. I did do a tiny bit of research. So you saw the director's cut, right?
Yes,
Isn't there
times.
a whole subplot about Ripley having like a dead daughter who died when she was in cryosleep?
So when she first wakes up, and this is coming back from deep memory, she actually gets to talk to her daughter over a video call, essentially. And her daughter, who is now in her like 70s, essentially, who's much older than her, who is actually played by Sigourney Weaver's mother.
Oh.
And so they have a conversation about, her being lost and now being found and everything, how she's so much younger, even though she's like 100 plus years old at this point. And, her daughter is like on death's door, essentially. And then as the movie goes on, at a point in time, Burke does reveal to her that she has died at some point in time.
Oof. That's pretty brutal. So I'm just going to say this. I don't think the movie needs that subplot.
I think it's an interesting reflection of the mother-daughter relationship that this movie and this movie series kind of comes back to a couple times. Like, there's a connection between Newt and Ripley that becomes like a mother-daughter bond that Ripley kind of misses with her own daughter, and then that's contrasted with the nature of the queen alien, right?
I see all that, and I will concede all those points. I just don't think it's necessary. You know what I mean? I think the bond between Ripley and Newt, for however short-lived it is so effective that we don't need dead 70-year-old daughter. You know what I mean?
I think what you're also missing, have you ever seen the extended edition of the director's cut?
No, and honestly, that's the only thing that I know about the director's cut is that Ripley apparently has a dead daughter.
I think what you're also missing is the element of horror that it brings to the first 30 minutes of the film, in that in cryosleep, time passes without you being able to even acknowledge it. And so Ripley has been lost in space for so long that essentially everything that she knows and loves is gone.
I can very well see that, but again, I don't know that the movie really needs all that. Like, this is an action movie. I don't know that we need that much psychological depth, that we need that much like, what's Snapchat, or like what happened to Facebook, you know what I mean?
Right.
I think it's cool that it's there, and it's cool that they shot it. And I think I read that Sigourney Weaver was like royally fucking pissed off that they cut it from the theatrical version.
Right.
But I don't think that this action movie from 1986 needed all that.
I think that it would be interesting for you to watch and also me to return to, because it's been a few years, to the director's cut and watch them and discuss that at another time and see like what your thoughts are after seeing it included in the film, to see if it enhances it. Because my memory was...
Yeah, and it's funny, not to cut you off, even though I'm totally cutting you off. Like, normally I'm all about that shit. Like, in my own writing, I'm very much like, yeah, like, let's dig into, like, the nuances of these characters, or, like, what they're feeling, and, like, you know, how they feel about these new surroundings, or how they feel about each other. But for this action movie, I'm just like, no, get it away from me. Get it away from me. Like, I don't want it.
So I don't know. Maybe at some point, if you do end up watching the director's cut, we can talk about it on like a future episode or something like that, and carve out like some time, or just have like a special short episode of it. But it's something that we could discuss at another time, I think, when we have actually seen it. Like, I think we've done a good discussion of our thoughts at this point.
Yeah, it's funny. I've actually, if I'm dropping more Michael lore, I've kind of started this new project a month ago, and the main character has a dead fiance and a dead sister. And recently I've been like turning over I've been like kind of prodding the dead sister's corpse. I'm like, maybe just the dead fiance is enough. Like, maybe he doesn't need 2 women in his refrigerator. Maybe just the one. But that's neither here nor there. But anyways, going back to Newt, I just kind of feel like the scene where they're in bed together and they're like talking, and you know, Ripley's being all like motherly and like very kind and everything. And Newt has that kind of heartbreaking line where she's like, they said that monsters weren't real, but they were wrong, weren't they? Like, monsters are real. Right. I was like, fuck, you're both gonna need a lot of therapy when this is over. But
yes.
No, that scene might actually be one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie. It's funny, like, there's all this like high octane action and suspense and horror, but just that quiet scene of like Ellen Ripley and Newt just kind of a surrogate family for 5 minutes. There's something very kind of heartwarming in that.
Right, and that's something that kind of, again, gets brought up at other points in the film too, their relationship. Like, I mean, the final standoff between, or not the final standoff, but the first meeting of the Queen with Ripley is so fascinating, because the Queen and Ripley both almost acknowledge each other as mothers protecting their young.
So fucking cool. Fucking cool. Ripley like kind of aims the flamethrower at the eggs, and then the other xenomorphs kind of start backing off.
Yeah. It also points to like the true intelligence of these creatures, that they also can recognize when their offspring are threatened.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's such a great part of the movie. Like, it's such a cool standoff. Like, I've seen other movies do this not effectively, and this one really felt authentic.
Again, it's so fucking cool. And I mean, the whole third act is spectacular and this is what I mean about these two movies kind of mirroring each other. Like, the third acts are hauntingly similar. They're just, it's almost like a difference of scale. Like, you've got Ripley having to go rescue Newt while this like smoke and fire factory is blowing up around her, and like, you know, it's this big tense moment, and then she escapes, and then we have like our secret fourth act where it's like, haha, just kidding, everything's still fucked.
Yeah, there's like this one even is like a shorter sigh of relief, and it's like they make it off, the explosion happens, they get away, and they all get out, and like Ripley has that moment where she's like, great job, Bishop, and Bishop's like taking it back, like that she would compliment him.
Oh, she's like, oh, you do like me, yeah.
And he's like, oh, thank you. And at that exact moment is when he like basically gets ripped in half by
like
the Queen.
Bisected, yeah.
Yeah, which is just, it's so fast that you almost don't even have time to comprehend that this movie isn't actually over and our heroes aren't even safe yet.
I know, right? And then there's the famous get away from her, you bitch moment with like the exosuit or whatever you call it.
One of the great moments of this movie is the exosuit fight. It's something that I think this is probably the first time that an exosuit is used in this way in a movie, and it's something that becomes kind of a mainstay in sci-fi films, right, going forward. And it's something that even James Cameron returns to because it's super cool, and also the effects that they use to create like these exosuits are so good that like I couldn't even tell how they did it while I was watching it.
No. And it's funny, like you talk about like, promises and payoffs and storytelling. Like
Yeah.
there's that great moment early on where Ripley's talking to the Marine. She's like, "Oh, like I can help." And he's like, "Oh
Yeah.
yeah." She's like, "Oh yeah, like I'm certified to operate one of those things. Let me do it." And she just starts stacking boxes.
Yeah.
And you're just like, "That's going to show up later, isn't it?"
Yeah. Well, and it's also like it's so cool. It looks fantastic. Like I said, I don't even know how the effects they did it while I was watching it. I was like, this looks incredible. Like it looks so real. Looks like they actually created these cargo loaders. It was so real at the time that afterwards like contractors were trying to buy these cargo loaders so that they could use them in construction sites and stuff like that, and obviously they still don't exist, but
Dude, like, if those things actually existed, I'd give it like 20 minutes before like the UFC developed like a cargo loader fight. Or, like they tape boxing gloves to the end of it and just start beating the
yeah.
shit out of each other. I'd watch it. I don't care. But
Yeah. No, they're pretty awesome. And so is that scene. Like it's so epic, like their fight, and then as something that happens frequently in the Alien franchise, there's a moment in time where the physics of space comes into play where we basically eliminate the alien by creating a vacuum and shooting it out into space.
yeah, I forgot about that too. We kill it the exact same way too. It's like just flush it into deep space.
Which, I mean, fair enough. Like, that's the best way that you're going to eliminate these things, right? Is just like getting them out into a vacuum.
If I ever have a mortal enemy, like if we ever crack open a hole in another dimension and we meet evil Michael, who becomes my mortal enemy, and we have many battles over the years, that's how I finally want to kill him. I want to chuck him out into the vacuum of space.
I've been thinking, so you know that I have thoughts about writing a space novel.
You do. Actually, to those at home, Blake has an idea for a space novel, and it's actually pretty fucking sick.
I've been bouncing this idea around, and I'll mention it now because I find it fascinating. And it's actually in large part because of this franchise. I've been wondering if there's something more horrific than sending or shooting dead people or people spacing people, essentially. If there's something that I can come up with for a worse death or punishment on a spaceship, and I think that I have one.
Okay.
And I almost don't want to tell you any more than that, but now I've kind of gone on this train. But like, if you think about it, especially if you're in deep space or something like that, I think that it would be, and this kind of also even relates to Dune, I think that wasting the resources of a body would be almost frowned upon in a self-contained spaceship.
Right.
And so I wonder if there's some sort of almost like cryo chamber, like suicide chamber, where they put you in it and they extract all of your resources all at once while you're alive or something like that, which could be even like more horrific than dying by being spaced.
Like a super dehydration chamber or something.
Yes,
Yeah, that
exactly.
is pretty fucking cool.
Yeah.
Hey, you heard it here first, folks, but it's our idea. Jeez.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, but we'll see if I mean, I haven't done any writing in a little while, so we'll see if I can actually work up the nerve to put something on paper. But
I've done so much writing lately that my fucking elbows hurt today. But aside from my terrible aging body, I do want to go back. So a pet peeve that I have in writing or in stories a lot is sometimes when I look at the two characters, I'm like, I don't understand why they're risking their lives for each other. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I will say the bond between Ripley is so strong that when she goes full mama bear mode and she's like suiting up to rescue her, I'm like, no, I believe it. Fuck yeah, totally believe it. Go get her.
Yeah, for sure. So effects and filming. We've talked about a lot of effects and filming already, but I kind of want to talk a little bit about the making of the movie, the fact that, they struggled for years to get a sequel off the ground. There's maybe some hesitation by the studio, and we've talked about that. James Cameron was approached because of the making of the Terminator and how well that was going. Like, I don't even think at the point at time when he had been approached that Terminator had been released. So it was just strongly based on his prospects as a director. I believe he was actually one of the prominent screenwriters of the movie. Yeah, he did the screenplay for this, and I think there was maybe prior drafts of this movie, and they didn't really know where to take it. And so this is really like such a James Cameron vehicle. And he even had thoughts at the time of making it, like, about kind of setting it to a very different genre, very different pacing of the first movie, which, obviously turned out very successful.
I think I kind of can appreciate where he was coming from, where he just said, like, the first, as a horror movie, the first movie was perfect, so let's just do something else.
Yeah, I agree. And, like, I think that's extremely smart. I think that serves this movie well and serves the franchise really well. It's something that, if we compare to the Predator franchise, which is obviously deeply connected to this in terms of the time period in which those movies come out, and like the fact that there's crossover and all that fun stuff. Yeah. I've watched the first Predator movie, and I've watched Prey, the movie that came out a couple years ago that takes place in like North America, and I think like like some point between the 1600s and 1800s, and it's like Apache territory where the Predator comes down to hunt the indigenous population. And I think that that's really cool that they were able to kind of spin that movie off and not quite take it in a different genre, but put it in a vastly different setting and kind of refresh the format in that way. I think that also is pretty comparable here to resetting the franchise, or not even necessarily resetting the franchise, but just like revitalizing it using a very different format for this movie as compared to the first one.
Yeah, no kidding. The first movie was very much a 70s movie. The second one's very much an 80s movie. Like, it really... I almost feel like... And I think I said this about Titanic when we did that. It's like, this movie almost shouldn't work, or like... But it somehow does, right? Right. Or it's like, we're living in the only timeline where this movie is actually good.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of even, like, getting this movie, like, James Cameron clashed so hard with all the crew of this film that, like, I'm even a little bit surprised that we got a finished good movie out of this, because James Cameron was over in the UK making this movie under the British filmmaking industry. And apparently the British filmmaking industry is very different in terms of how they make movies compared to Hollywood. Like, it's, I guess, kind of reflects like the different values of Europe versus the values of America, right? Where the Americans want to work like all hours, want to, grind and produce like something incredible, whereas like there's a lot more work-life balance in Europe, and people want to take breaks. Like, there's a little bit more laissez-faire. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Canada is somewhere in the middle of the U.S. and Europe in terms of values and stuff. So I think that we're probably somewhere in between those two, but that's a whole different conversation. But James Cameron is also, what I'll say about James Cameron is, while he might not be the world's best dialogue writer, and there's been lots of stuff online about how he can't act at all, but James Cameron actually is maybe one of the best filmmakers ever in terms of having a deep understanding of every piece of technology and crew and job on a film site. Like, he can, and this is actually something that he clashed with quite a bit, is, James Cameron is somebody who will go in and fix lighting if he thinks that the lighting's off from what he wants. And
that's
he
really
knows how to
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, he knows like that sort of stuff. Like, he knows how different cameras work. He knows different lenses, like, probably better than a lot of film like crew do. And so he's able to kind of navigate all of that, but he's also a perfectionist, and he's also somebody who, like, you're going to be constantly getting notes from him, or he's going to be going in and adjusting what you've done, and that's going to rub people the wrong way.
Oh, I know people like that. Yeah, it's very much like, okay.
And it got to a point where, like, he ended up firing his light person, and then the entire crew walked out on him afterwards.
Wow, that must have been a really popular light person.
Yeah, and his wife, who was the producer of the film, ended up being able to convince everybody to come back and like finish the movie with them. Even like as a side note, like that caused issues, the fact that she was a producer and all of that sort of stuff. But they ended up finally finishing it. I don't think James Cameron ever made another movie under the British film industry again. There's a quote that I saw online that was like, maybe the the best quote I've ever seen from a person to somebody else. It's horrible. On one of the last days of filming, James Cameron told the crew, "This has been a long and difficult shoot, fraught by many problems, but the one thing that kept me going through all this was a certain knowledge that one day I would drive out of the gate of Pinewood, the studio that they were filming at, and never come back, and that you sorry bastards would still be here."
I mean, he did go on to become James Cameron, so
yep.
you know.
Well, and he's pretty infamously known for being tough on set, but
he's
you know,
been known to be kind of a dick. I think I've heard that he's mellowed out with age, but yeah.
Yeah. And it seems like actors all really love working with James Cameron. Like, he has his core crew that he works with on a lot of movies, Sigourney Weaver being one of those people, but I can see the person that he is. Like, and we all know that person who's extremely good at their job, knows what they're talking about, knows what they're doing, but is also very short with people.
And I
because
think
of that.
we've certainly made this joke. I don't know if we've done it on podcasts, but it's like, if you are really, really good at your job, you can get away with being a dick. Mm-hmm. Or if you're like really, really bad at your job, if you're really nice, you can get away with being really, really bad at your job. But like, you can't be bad at your job and a dick. Then we just fire you.
Exactly. Yep. See Chevy Chase.
See Chevy Chase.
Well, and that's even a different scenario where you can be really great at your job, but if you're too much of a dick, there's a certain point in time where people don't even want to deal with your shit.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to call back to Joss Whedon. I think that's kind of what he's been up. That's kind of what we got with him. So
yeah.
I was reading about the troubled production, and it seems like most of the actors were on James Cameron's side.
Yeah.
Throughout the whole thing. So it was very much a East versus West, America versus Britain kind of thing.
I mean, I think for a movie to be successful, I think that the cast has to be in the palm of the director. Like, I think that the director and the cast, more so than almost everybody else, have to be in agreement on things, or else the movie just isn't going to work. Like, obviously, the director has to keep control of everything. It's their vision that's being put up on screen and all of that sort of thing. But if a director has one thing in mind and the cast isn't doing what they want to do, then they're basically creating two different movies, right?
Yeah, no kidding. I'm actually just reading this now while we're talking. Apparently his nickname for a while was Iron Jim. Because that's how much of a tyrant he was on set.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Speaking of the actors and their training, so all of the Marines actually ended up getting 2 weeks of training, special training by the British Special Air Service, and actually under the training of Sergeant Al Matthews, who's actually the sergeant in the film. So they all got like a 2-week training together to build like camaraderie, build them like as a real team, like make them feel real together. And they left out of the training Sigourney Weaver and then the two guys playing Burke and Bishop, so that they kind of felt like separate from the rest. Like there was kind of that almost like implicit like feeling of the camaraderie kind of up against these characters who are being introduced to the Marine group. And I think that worked actually really well. I think the other thing that's really interesting about how that all came to be, how they filmed all of that, one of that early scenes where we're introduced to the Marines all together, that's actually one of the last scenes that got filmed in the entire movie, because they wanted all of those actors to be so comfortable with each other and feel like so buddy-buddy with each other that scene really felt natural.
Interesting. I think I also read that they were all given copies of some Heinlein book.
Oh, they were given copies of Starship Troopers.
Right. Actually. I knew that from somewhere.
Yeah, just learning about being a space marine in a fascist universe.
Cool. It's funny. I've mentioned that I'm a Zero Punctuation fan. Yahtzee always points out how like Weyland Yutani, like of all the sci-fi franchises with like evil corporate conglomerates, Weyland Yutani is the most suicidally, self-destructively evil of all time.
It's so true. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're also like one of the most famous, and for good reason too. Like they're very well written in this franchise.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I love this, and this goes back to like how much I was like just pouring over the setting and like the set design and everything earlier and how great it was. So the Fox execs who saw an early cut of the film got really mad at the producer, Gail Ann Hurd. They thought that all of the money for the movie just went into making the sets, and none of the other special effects would get as much money in that case. And so she actually told them at that point that in reality, most of the sets were actually miniatures. And then they were doing like optical like illusions. And I mean, I didn't even it didn't even cross my mind until that point in time that most of what we were looking at in this movie is actually miniatures. That's how great the miniatures look in this movie.
Yeah, I would never even have made that connection. Fuck. This really is the golden age of filmmaking where like all the shit on screen actually has to exist.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of practical effects. I think that using like miniatures is just so effective in portraying like sci-fi on screen. Like it's the same thing with 2001: A Space Odyssey, the early Star Wars movies, all of that sort of stuff. Like it's so much better having something tangible that looks like it's been man-made in front of you rather than like computer-generated sci-fi stuff.
Yeah, no kidding.
Oh, the scene where Newt goes down the duct in the climax of the movie when she falls down there and Ripley has to go save her. The actress playing Newt actually was having so much fun sliding down the slide that she kept blowing the scene just to be able to slide down it because she said it was a 3-story tall slide. And so then James Cameron said, you know what, kid, if you just do this shot for me once, I'll let you play on it as much as you want afterwards. And so he actually like let her do that, and that's how they got through the scene.
I like to think that as much of a dick as he can be on set, he was at least nice to the kid. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like Stanley Kubrick being nice to Danny in The Shining.
Yeah. I love when movies do this, and this happens twice in the movie. I love when a movie has a time limit and then sticks to that time limit real world. It's like such a small detail, but like, for example, the 15-minute countdown to the explosion is like an actual 15 minutes from when that happens to when they get off and the explosion happens. So that's timed exactly. There's other moments in the movie where they just bring up timelines like, oh, this is going to take 10 seconds or 10 minutes or whatever. And then those actually like play out exactly as expected. So,
you know, it's funny. Did you ever watch Dragon Ball Z?
No.
When Frieza nicks the core of planet Namek and he says that it's going to blow up in 5 minutes, and then like 7 more episodes go by. Yeah.
I was about to ask if that's what was going to be the case, but
no, it's funny. You can cut this too. I don't care. Dragon Ball Z Abridged made a joke about that, where Goku's just like, "Do you own a watch? Do you know how long 5 minutes is? Because I don't think you do."
Yeah. The Alien Queen. So we talked about in the first Alien movie just how much work went into creating like a realistic alien with, you know, how many people it took to like move all of the mandibles and the face and everything. The actual Alien Queen was like, they actually made like this giant like creation out of puppets, and then I believe they also used a little bit of CG on it as well, potentially, but it took about 16 people to operate the entire alien.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, they had to move it all independently. So it was like so convincing, like it was so famous, the Alien Queen, that Steven Spielberg actually got the special effects guy to come and build the T-Rex for Jurassic Park. It's the same guy.
Wow, good for him.
This movie. Yep. So connection to one of the most famous movies of all time.
We haven't done Jurassic Park, have we?
We have not done Jurassic Park yet.
Okay.
We will do it at some point, but it's also a classic, one of the most famous movies of all time, and we might not have gotten it in the same way that we did without Aliens.
Wow, fancy that. I will say, the Alien Queen, maybe the xenomorphs go down a bit in scale in terms of like scare factor, but like the Alien Queen is fucking terrifying. Apparently H.R. Geiger didn't even design it, but he gave his thumbs up when he saw it in theaters.
Yeah, oddly enough, he wasn't consulted on this movie at all. He was actually at this point doing another movie, and I can't remember what it was, but it is fascinating to hear that a lot of the reason why these movies are so great is because of him, and he wasn't even consulted on it.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. Hey, I'll take credit for things I didn't do, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I guess Steve O'Bannon or whatever his name was as well gets credit on the creation of all these too, right? He was only involved in the first movie.
Yeah, that's when you know you've arrived, when you get credit for things you didn't do.
Yeah. Last special effect that I wanted to know was, I mentioned this earlier, that the actor playing Newt, or the actress playing Newt, she was a one and done, like a special. They found her. They interviewed dozens of children. They found her at school in England, I think it was. Her and Sigourney Weaver, they tested them against each other. They had kind of a bond right off the bat. So the actress playing her, and this was something that the reason why I'm bringing this up is because while I was watching this movie, I kept hearing like a British accent in the actress, and I was like, wait, did I just hear a British accent there? Like, is this a British actress or is this an American actress? Like,
hey, what's the big idea here?
yeah, are we like, is the actress, is there an issue here that the actress can't nail an English or an American accent? And it turns out that the actress was living in England. Her mom was English, dad was American, and so she was going to school at an American school in England. Like, there's an Air Force base that she was at. And so whenever I heard the English accent, it's just because of like her upbringing about being a half American, half English girl living in England, but being taught by a lot of Americans. So I thought it was really cool that my brain picked that up as I was watching it.
Like, what's going on with your accent, kid? There's something going on with your accent.
I picked it out this time, and I did some research on it. Thought that was interesting.
Have you ever seen Highlander?
Yes.
Remember
the most famous example of an accent that's not...
Remember, it's like, you talk funny, Spudge. Like, where are you from? And he just goes, lots of different places.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of that one, but...
it's fun. It's cheesy.
That's a movie for you and Jason to do at some point without me, because I have no interest in the Highlander franchise.
The second you leave the podcast again, we're instantly doing Highlander.
Yeah. It's actually coming up pretty soon, I think.
Yeah, you got some stuff going on. So, if you guys liked me and Jason's banter, then here we are.
The score of this movie, really great score. James Horner did this one. He became a frequent collaborator with James Cameron, so he also scored Titanic. He scored Avatar. He probably scored the other Avatar movies. He also scored Braveheart, and so James Horner was another guy who James Cameron and him had a falling out after this movie, and then James Cameron ended up reconnecting with him after he did Braveheart, and James Cameron loved the score of that movie so much that they came back and collaborated afterwards.
This is what I just said. It's okay to be a dick as long as you're really good at your job.
Yeah. I don't know. It's a solid score. I like this one on par with the Alien movie. I probably don't have too much more to add to that. It just fits everything very well.
Yeah, for sure.
Look back at the times. We mentioned this in the last episode. This movie poster is almost as iconic as the first movie poster, with Sigourney Weaver and Newt on screen with the massive flamethrower gun. I think it's pretty epic, but it almost as iconic, not quite as iconic as the first one.
It's pretty iconic, though.
Oh, I didn't mention this before, but Al Matthews, the Marine Sergeant in the movie, who was actually a real Marine Sergeant, he was actually the first Black Marine to be promoted to the rank of Sergeant during Vietnam in America, period. So.
Oh, fancy that. Yeah. The guy who's chomping on the cigar straight out of crowd
yeah.
seat. Huh.
Yeah, he's an actual piece of history, and good for him.
Good for him. Nice.
The movie itself was actually never shown to a test audience, and the reason for that was because the editing and scoring of the movie didn't finish until a week before it was theatrically released.
Jesus Christ. All right, guys, we're doing this.
They pushed the limit of their edit time.
Huh.
But going into the legacy of this movie, this becomes, one of the highest grossing movies of 1986. This movie almost single-handedly saved the Fox movie studio. It was nominated for Sigourney Weaver, nominated for Best Actress. I believe it was nominated for Best Special Effects. Oh, and it was nominated for Best Sound Effects.
Okay, it's Best Sound Design, right?
Yeah, Best Sound Effects Editing.
Oh, okay.
So it did win both Best Sound Effects Editing and Best Visual Effects. So this is the second Alien movie that got nominated for awards, and it did also win some awards.
Fancy that.
Yeah, honestly, sci-fi movies don't get recognized all that much by the Academy, so it's cool to see like this one getting its due. It was also nominated for a lot more things than I thought. It was nominated for Best Art Direction. It was nominated for Best Film Editing, Best Original Score, Best Sound, and then, like I said, it won Best Sound Effects and Best Visual Effects.
Okay. Interesting.
Personal reviews and the partner factor. Do you want to start or should I start on this one?
Yeah, let's start. So I am still partnerless.
Yep.
Subscribe to our Patreon if you want to slide into my DMs. But
that's a cult, and I don't condone that.
This whole podcast has really just been a cult vehicle for me. But anyways, no, I watched this movie alone, and I liked it. I liked it quite a bit. I'm kind of on the fence about which one I like more, Alien or Aliens. But I think I like this one a little more.
So I love this movie, and I love the Aliens franchise. Like, I've only, before this, watching this and doing this for the podcast, I'd only ever seen Alien, Aliens, and Prometheus. I do think that the first two Alien movies stand alone as two of the best movie achievements of all time. Ever since I first saw these movies when I was probably about 17, 18 years old, my thought process has been that Alien is the better movie. It's more technically better. It stands out as one of the crowning achievements of sci-fi horror of all time. The dialogue is so sharp. The pacing is like so well crafted. It's just, in my opinion, Alien is a perfect movie, but I think Aliens is a more fun, more rewatchable, good time. I am more likely, like I said, I almost always return to the franchise and watch Alien and Aliens back to back, but I probably have once or twice just watched the movie Aliens by itself, because the movie Aliens is just so goddamn entertaining from start to finish that it's so fun to just casually watch this movie.
I think maybe that's a good way of putting it. Alien is the more thoughtful and the more interesting. This one is just more fun, though.
Yeah, the legacy of Alien, like Alien changed the game, whereas Aliens just enhanced the experience and made for like a really fun cinematic experience. And like Aliens, like I almost want to go back on that a little bit, because Aliens is extraordinarily influential. Like, it obviously, like I said in the primer episode, like this obviously influenced a lot of the rest of James Cameron's career and his filmography, and like certain tropes or ideas that he returns to originated in this movie and the Terminator. So I don't want to underscore the legacy of this one, but at the end of the day, without Alien, we would not have gotten Aliens. So Jess watched this one with me. Like I said, I thought it was really fascinating watching this one with her, not having seen this one before, because the first 30 minutes she was like, this is awful. And then by the end she was like, wow, that was a really good movie. And I was like, you weren't saying that the first 30 minutes when the Marines were doing their thing.
Yeah.
But I did say it to her at one point when she was just about to walk away from the movie, I think, because she was like, oh, I hate these characters. Why do I have to spend the rest of this movie with these characters? And I was like, spoilers, you're not going to be spending another 10 minutes with these characters. So yeah, that's what just makes this movie really pop. And then we haven't talked about the rest of the Alien franchise, and again, that's maybe for good reason, because they
suck. Yeah.
And I so happen to watch all of them.
Oh no, are we doing this again? All right.
So we're gonna do a very quick Alien movie ranking. So what I'll say is, the Alien franchise has 4 movies in the Sigourney Weaver Ripley franchise. There is 2 movies in the rebooted prequel series that Ridley Scott created in the 2010s. And then there is a movie that's coming out in August. And there are 2 Alien vs. Predator movies that are crossovers. Obviously, I haven't seen the new movie that's coming out in August. I also didn't watch Alien vs. Predator 1 or 2 because I just think of those 2 movies as, A, they're a little gimmicky, but B,
they're kind of just doing their own thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like they're actually more in the Predator universe than they are in the Aliens universe. Like, I feel like the Aliens in there are just kind of useful in creating like an even matchup to the Predator, but I actually feel like their themes and ideas of those movies match up more with the Predator, and the Predator is actually like the central
The
character.
central guy. Yeah, I've never really
Yeah.
seen the movie, so I can't speak to that. But before you get into Alien 3, I was actually hoping we could maybe do that sometime, just because I've heard of how like legendarily awful the production process was.
Right. We can definitely do it at some point, although I don't know when we're going to do it. You might have to fit that one into a you pick, but
Maybe that'll be the one solo episode that I do.
yeah. And we're going to get to Alien 3 momentarily here. So I will just quickly start off by doing Alien and Aliens, my face hugger scale out of 5. And again, this is similar if you listen to our Tremors episode, one of my favorite movies of all time, and I'd never seen any of the other movies from this. I'd actually seen more of the Alien franchise this time before diving into the entirety of the franchise all in 1 week. Again, similar to the Tremors discussion movie rankings, I wanted to do it out of something fun, and like obviously Tremors isn't a 10 out of 10 movie, but it's a lot of fun, and we have to have a framing device for the rest of the movie. So we're doing a 1 to 5 facehugger score for all of these movies, starting with the movie Alien, which I consider to be a 5 out of 5 facehuggers. It is, in my opinion, the best film of the most well-crafted film of the entire series. I have absolutely no notes. It is the thing that kicked everything off. Obviously, it's the best film of the franchise, even though I do have more fun with the Aliens movie, which I gave a 4.5 out of 5 facehuggers. It's a absolute blast. It's the more rewatchable of the two. The dialogue's not the best. It's the only 0.5 that I deduct from it. Otherwise, I consider it basically a perfect movie along with Alien. And then we get to Alien 3.
Oh
And
boy.
oh boy. Oh boy. I won't spend too much time on this because if we are going to do this at a later point, then we can talk about some of the stuff then. This is David Fincher's first major film, and it's almost one that David Fincher himself almost quit directing movies because of it. I love he has a famous quote where he said, "Believe me, nobody hates Alien 3 more than I do."
I love that.
I can't even blame the guy, right? This is a movie that's obviously been tampered with by the studio, and you can really tell it's so unfocused. It feels like it's run out of ideas right out of the get-go. It's also an evil movie, I will say. And so this is spoilers. If you don't want to hear about the canon of the Alien franchise and where things go after the Aliens movie, this may be a good time to cut it off now because I'm about to just ruin Aliens for you.
Okay,
just like Alien 3. Alien 3 opens up with the ship that is carrying Hicks, Newt, and Ripley crashing on a prison planet, and everyone on the shuttle dies except for Ripley. Pretty horrifically. And that is the opening scene of the movie. Yes, pretty horrifically, and things go from there. If you love the characters from the Aliens movie, I couldn't even get past that scene almost because I had so much disdain for the story at that point that I never really recovered. From there, it's kind of a boring movie. This is honestly the worst movie of the entire franchise. I give it a 1.5 out of 5 facehuggers because whatever you do not watch this movie on Disney+. And why I say that is this is actually going back to the primer episode where I said that it's a shame that there's not other viewing options because every one of the Alien movies has a director's cut or a revised cut. In the case of Alien 3, David Fincher didn't even want to come back and re-edit this movie because he was so upset by what they did to him in the cutting room. So what they actually did was they found David Fincher's notes from the cutting room, and they took all of what David Fincher originally intended for the movie without him, and they made an abridged version that's actually 30 minutes longer and is supposed to fix a lot of the problems that I had with the movie. Now, it can't fix the opening part that I hated, but from what I hear, that other version, that longer version that you can get on DVD, the extended version, is significantly better. It actually, one thing that the Alien 3 does is it starts to explore religion in this universe and how religion comes into play with these aliens. but it's so skin deep. It's so surface level. Like it's almost just like a one line mention of it in the Alien 3 movie that I was like, why didn't we explore this further when I was watching it? Because of the themes of the first two movies and how rich they are in their themes. And so do not watch this movie on Disney Plus is all I can say, because you will watch the far lower quality version of this on Disney Plus, and there's a superior version which I can't even find to stream anywhere. I'm just gonna have to buy the DVD at some point. So
Okay, maybe we'll do that one then.
yeah, so I have to put that out there, but I wanted to watch the version that was most available that people were going to see, and oh my god, is it awful.
Okay, good to know.
Yes. And then we get to
not to cut you off, I do think it would be fun to one day on this podcast just do a bad movie.
we can do Alien 3, but I don't even want to ever watch Alien 3 again. That's not the edited extended version.
Okay, good to know.
It was such a miserable experience. I will say it does have a starring role of Tywin Lannister is in the film. I'm not even going to spoil things, but anyway, it's a miserable movie, and it made me mad to watch the whole thing.
Okay, that's
1.5 out of 5 facehuggers. Alien Resurrection, the final movie in the Ripley Alien saga, is a genuinely silly, fun movie that I can't even call really a horror anymore. It's kind of a low-budget, goofy movie. What I'll say about this movie is it kind of reminded me of the Riddick franchise.
Okay.
I found it very similar to it. I think that this is maybe my favorite Sigourney Weaver performance out of all of the 4 movies.
Really?
Oddly enough. So, spoilers again. Alien Resurrection takes place several hundred years after the events of the first 3 movies, and Sigourney Weaver's character is cloned and is a alien human hybrid.
Okay.
And Sigourney Weaver's Ripley in this film is almost an anti-hero in this film. And I love her performance in this movie. I found it really, really entertaining to watch. I found it really interesting because she's Ripley, but she's also got this like sharp edge to her, this like kind of menacing edge to her. You don't know if she's going to turn on people at any point in time, but it's just a really fun movie that's also has like, it's really funny at times too. Like there's some genuine laugh out loud moments. It's got performances from Winona Ryder. It's got Ron Perlman in it. Like it's got some big actors and they're doing a lot of fun stuff. I wouldn't say this movie is original by any means, but it's a good time. I give Alien Resurrection 3.5 out of 5 facehuggers. I actually enjoyed it. I had a good time.
Is it worth watching Alien 3 to get to Alien Resurrection?
You have to?
Okay.
Because of the events of Alien 3, but do not watch Alien 3 on Disney Plus. It's so bad.
Okay.
You got to watch the extended. But Alien Resurrection, I liked it. And I wasn't expecting to like it, especially after the bad taste of Alien 3 in my mouth. I didn't think I could watch another Alien movie and enjoy it.
Okay, wow, it's that bad. Interesting.
Yeah. And then there's a long break between Alien movies, and Prometheus comes out in the 2010s. It's Ridley Scott returning to the franchise. It's a stealth prequel. Like Prometheus wasn't really advertised as an Alien movie, and then it turned out that it was an Alien movie. I didn't see this one in theaters, but Jason and I actually watched this one together. I think we were hungover at the time at his brother's place.
That tracks.
Yeah, and so him and I were both blown away by the visuals of this movie, but it's a really frustrating movie to watch because it's visually stunning, but the characters are just making terrible decisions the whole time. They're terrible characters. They irk you so much that it really brings down this movie. What I'll say positives about this movie is Michael Fassbender as David the android is maybe the best portrayal of an android in the entire film series. And that's saying something. That we've talked about how androids become a very fascinating part of this franchise, but I think that Prometheus is worth exploring just for the portrayal of David in this film, as well as the fact that it's visually a very beautiful movie, although it's frustrating. All that said, Prometheus, 2 out of 5 facehuggers. So it's okay, but it's not great.
I can remember seeing it in theaters in 2012, 12 years ago, and I can remember being like, I think I saw it with my other friend Mike, and we were both just kind of like, I really want to like this movie, just something about it is off, you know?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like it didn't quite nail the landing, but there was enough aspects of it that like I've come back to it. I probably watched Prometheus like 3 times now just because it's a very imperfect movie that it's a fascinating film in this series because it's so imperfect and its imperfections are so blatant in my opinion.
Okay.
And then the last film that's been released is Alien Covenant. So it's the sequel to the Prometheus franchise. It continues David's story, David the android from Prometheus, in an interesting way that I was not expecting. And it just highlights how great of an actor Michael Fassbender is. And I'm so glad that he continued in this film. I was surprised by this movie, actually. I had never seen this one because I have such a complicated relationship with Prometheus that I'd never actually watched Alien Covenant. But I was surprised by this one. I really enjoyed it. Like, I like this movie a lot, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It has really strong characters. It has a really interesting story. So the premise of Alien Covenant is it's about a decade after the events of Prometheus, and the ship, the Covenant, which is holding about 1,000 settlers plus a few thousand human embryos, is sent on an interstellar mission to go and colonize a planet. And on their way, some events happen. They end up by chance on a course for a planet that actually appears to be more habitable than the planet they were initially going to, and the crew decides to go and explore this planet instead. A lot of this movie is the exploration parts of Alien. Like, it spends a lot of time doing the exploration, and then the horror kind of just comes at you from like out of nowhere almost. It's got a like really, really great moments from the other movies. Like, it's kind of a blend of all of the movies combined. So like I think a lot of people it rubbed the wrong way when it first came out because it feels like a greatest hits of the Alien movies.
Right.
But I think if you're like a big fan of the movies, it kind of remixes everything in such a way that like it's really entertaining. And like I said, if you liked Michael Fassbender's performance in Prometheus, oh my god, does it go to another level in Alien Covenant.
Okay.
So
interesting.
yeah, I'd recommend people go back to check out Alien Covenant. Whether or not you've seen Prometheus, it definitely helps to have seen Prometheus and understand the character of David a little bit more. But Alien Covenant is my third favorite movie of the entire franchise. I gave it 4 out of 5 facehuggers. I genuinely really enjoyed it.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I
Nice.
thought it was such an interesting addition to the franchise, solely on the back of Michael Fassbender and his
Okay.
performance.
Well, I've said it before. Sometimes the performance carries a movie.
Yeah.
Well, good for what's his name, I guess, Ridley Scott. He's still cranking them out. And then there's another one coming out next month.
Yeah, it's a standalone movie. It's set between the events of Alien and Aliens, so we'll see how it does. I'm really hoping that it does well because the Prometheus series that Ridley Scott's not attached to this new movie, I don't believe. He might be a producer or something.
Oh, really? I gotta double check that.
Yeah, and so he's not directing. I know that for a fact, but the Alien Covenant actually really underperformed at the box office. So he was planning on doing like at least a trilogy of this new edition of the Aliens and kind of eventually tying it back to the first Alien movie. I honestly kind of hope that he gets his wish to make one more Alien movie because I kind of want to see more of David.
Okay, so it's really this character. I don't really remember much about Prometheus because I saw it 12 years ago, but like I do remember really liking that character.
Yes.
Except
and
for never mind. I'm not going to say it because it's a spoiler, but
yeah, I try not to spoil things too much in there. I'll just summarize my Alien movie rankings and we'll call her a day. So Alien, the first original movie, 5 out of 5 facehuggers. Aliens, 4.5 out of 5 facehuggers. Alien 3, low point of the series, 1.5 out of 5. Alien Resurrection, 3.5 out of 5. Not a bad movie. Prometheus, 2.5 out of 5. Not a great movie. And Alien Covenant, surpriser of the entire series, 4 out of 5 facehuggers.
okay, I might have to go check out Covenant now, actually.
Genuinely recommended. I had a really good time.
I think I remember seeing posters for it in 2016 and just being like, fuck it. Like, never mind. But
yeah,
I think that was a lot of people's attitude at the time, and maybe that was to its disservice.
Yeah, I think that Alien Covenant could come back pretty strong at this point. Like, I think being removed from the Prometheus and that decade and some of, like, the feelings at that point, I think there's a moment of it being a resurgence.
You got to give this franchise credit. Like, it just keeps trucking along, right? Like, sometimes 8 or 12 years go by between installments, and then they wheel out another one. You're like, oh, okay, like maybe this one's good.
I can't imagine being in like 1978 after the first Alien movie and being like, there's a franchise here. Like, I can't imagine, and especially on the directions that it takes. Like, Alien Resurrection is borderline a comedy. It's not quite a comedy, but it's borderline a comedy.
Okay. I mean, Joss Whedon wrote it, so yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I forgot to even mention that he was responsible for Alien Resurrection.
Why does Joss Whedon keep coming up in these episodes? I don't know why.
He's honestly like maybe one of the most prominent writers of the last like 30 years. He's somebody that we don't talk about a ton on the podcast because a lot of his movies that he's involved in are actually like at the tail end of what we talk about on this podcast. But again, he's kind of one of like the backbones of Hollywood, or was the backbone of Hollywood for a little while.
Yeah, remember how I said it's kind of the Chevy Chase thing, right? It's like, He's a dick. He's really good at his job, but we've all decided he's just too much of a dick, so we need to like get him out of here.
Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe you and I will watch Alien Covenant sometime, but
maybe we will.
I recommend it out to the listeners. It's a good movie.
Okay, maybe that's what I'll do on my next date. I'll be like, you want to see Alien Covenant? And if she says no, then I'll be like, she's a keeper.
I will spoil things with you. This is not a date movie. There are relationships in this movie, and every single one of them ends pretty horrifically.
Hey, here's a fun thing to watch to end this podcast on. What's like the worst movie date you've ever been on? Or maybe not even that, but like, have you ever been on a movie date and you realize like, I really shouldn't have brought this person I'm dating here?
I'm not gonna elaborate too much, but all I'll say is the last Harry Potter movie.
Okay, interesting. I think mine might have been Bone Tomahawk, actually.
That's fair.
Yeah, and that was with my partner at the time and with my mom, and they still won't talk to me.
Actually, I'm going to scratch that. I think the Harry Potter one's unfair. Again, not going to elaborate at all, but The Dark Knight.
Oh, I think I know this story, but I won't elaborate either.
We'll leave it on that mysterious note.
Okay, let's end it here. Don't look at any moist eggs on ships.
You know what? When somebody says to you, maybe have a closer look at that, the answer is always, hell nah, man, you have a closer look at that.
Yeah, really. I'm good, bro.
As always, tell your dad. We'll see you next time when we're doing The Talented Mr. Ripley.
Tell your dad. See you next week for The Talented Mr. Ridley. Ha 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 ha.
We can hopefully. Oh my God, we still have one more movie of trying to say Ripley versus Ridley. I'm going to be editing this and being like, "Damn it, we said Ridley again."
See, I threw that in at the end because I knew I wouldn't be editing it. So enjoy.
Yeah, you son of a bitch.
Haha.